I now call the Housing and Community Development Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, roll call.
You'll just let everyone know who is present
Okay.
on the committee.
Looking to my left and looking to my right, all committee members are here. And call for approval of the minutes. We have none. And public comment on agenda items only. Any public comment? Seeing or hearing none, we will have a presentation from our Housing and Community Economic Development Director.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why I got tongue twisted on your title for a second.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, committee members. Good afternoon, colleagues. Yeah, that's all of us. All right, so first, this presentation is just going to give a brief overview of the rental registration program and another ordinance that the Bureau has on the books called the pre-sale program. Today's discussion is going to go over the department and some of the work of the department and end in a recommendation around our work moving forward. All right, so as I've introduced Nikki, oh, thanks, Justin. It's okay, it's okay. So again, Nikki Wagman serving as interim director for the Department of Community and Economic Development. And in that department structure, here we go. In the department structure, there is, the department exists, I should say, to work in collaboration with residents and businesses and investors to progress the local economy of Chester. The department is comprised of a Bureau of Planning and Zoning, which is headed by Paul Fritz here, the Bureau of Health by Dr. Motley, and the Bureau of Licensing and Inspection, which is a mix of a few different managers. Next one. And specifically, I want to focus on the Bureau of Licensing today. That is where most of the presentation is going to be focused, but I didn't want to neglect the other two bureaus that house in the Community and Economic Development Department. All right, so the Bureau consists of about 14 staff members. We currently have 5 code enforcement officers, and there's a job posting out for the 6th code enforcement officers. There are building inspectors that look at the construction trades. There are service representatives and our front counter staff, the deputy director of licensing, myself as the interim director, and of course we have our third-party vendors that help us with some of the inspections that our Bureau does. All right, so I pulled some of the ordinances that guide our work in the Bureau. There's some, these are just a sampling, there are other ones that deal with nuisance activities. Just to give you a flair, the uses requiring a permit talks about what needs a certificate of occupancy. Article 1713 is the International Property Maintenance Code, which guides a lot of the work for the code enforcement team. There is 1714, licensing of the residential units, pre-sale, lead poisoning, neighborhood blight, etc. Next one, Justin, thank you. The core functions of the department, I don't expect you to read this at all, but effectively we oversee building permit application processes from intake to issuance. We oversee all of the construction-related inspections in conjunction with those permit activities, and then we enforce all property-related codes outside of the permitting process. So think of it as one side does the quality of life function. Next slide, Justin. This is like a more condensed version of the previous slide, but one side of the house does the quality of life functions, the other side does the construction-related functions with our building permits. And this is just a listing of some of the activities that we do. Specifically today, I wanted to give an overview of one of the larger driving activities that we do, which is the licensing of residential units. This was adopted in April of 2023 and effectively was to promote safe housing in Chester. I was not here for when this ordinance was adopted, but typically in communities where tenant-owned properties are trending on the high side, they adopt a rental registration program to ensure that property owners are complying with the applicable codes of the municipality, but also the property maintenance code itself. So a typical, we'll go through that a little bit more. Next, Justin, thank you. So there's an estimated 13,000 rental units within the city of Chester. I know on the, I'm blanking. The census website, it lists about 14,000 units, housing units within the city of Chester. I just want to make the distinction that housing units and rental units are the different things. So I'm not referring to housing units when I say 13,000 rental units. I'm specifically speaking to actual apartment rooms, not the house itself.
So is there 27,000 units altogether, or is it?
So there are 14,000 houses. Within those houses, it might be 5 units.
Okay.
Right. So that was confusing. I should have explained it better. So given that there's about 13,000 rental units and within the city, we have this rental registration ordinance that says units are to be licensed every 3 years, and tenant-occupied units are to be registered annually. So every time a property is licensed, it gets an inspection. That doesn't preclude the team from conducting inspections between those periods because complaints come in, we might notice issues and get called on site to investigate. All right, and then one specific thing I want to mention about the program is that if the owner of the property is not local, then they're to have a local agent who we can communicate with on any sort of emergency issues or issues in general. So we had this more recently where an owner who had an address in New York, we had an issue with a whole host of issues actually, but we're able to liaison directly with their local contact and get it resolved instead of waiting for communication and for them to travel down, et cetera. Some of the most common complaints and violations we see are around the life safety stuff. Thanks, Justin. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and means of egress. That meaning, you know, the smoke detectors and the carbon monoxide detectors are obvious, but those are typically missing in units, and we have to go in and require that they be installed. We see a lot of issues with means of egress, meaning that the window has to open for you to be able to escape in case of an emergency. This past winter, we had a lot of no heat complaints, plumbing issues, with fixtures not working, things along those lines. You get a lot of complaints and violations about electricity not being installed properly or not functioning, and then always complaints about proper working appliances, meaning stoves or ovens, things along those lines. All right, next one. So that's a little bit about the rental registration program, and I wanted to give you an overview of that in comparison to this program, which is the pre-sale inspections. They're adopted in the same meeting, and the purpose of this ordinance was to really improve the residential properties within the city. So the pre-sale inspection, how it works is every time there is a transaction within the city, a recorded one, it triggers an inspection from our team. So if I want to sell my house, I'm gonna pick on Paul. If I want to sell my house to Paul, an inspection has to happen. I have to call the city to say, hey, I'm doing this inspection, here's where it is and the address, and this is who I'm selling it to. The city comes out, we do our inspection checklist. When we note any violations, write a report, send it to the seller of the house to say these are all the violations that are existing, or on the positive end, there are no violations that exist, it's good to go. That report is then shared with Paul to let him know these are the violations that exist, and if Paul says this is great, I'll buy as is, Paul will buy the property, and then he is 6 months from the possession of the property to cure any of those violations. Now, a lot of times, that doesn't happen. People sell their property as is, or it's not shared with the city that a transaction happened. We do get to pull reports from the the tax office, so we can see what transactions have occurred, but it's not always, it's not always followed up by the proper protocol. Say that. This program is something that I haven't quite seen as much in other municipalities I've worked in. Typically, the private market is doing most of the housing inspections because we're effectively certifying that I, as an expert in this inspection process, I'm telling you that this house is quality or these sort of issues are minor or whatever the case may be. So this one was a newer program for me to kind of understand. And it's some of the other townships or boroughs around here do this program, but again, their inspection structure is a bit different. So just to give you a little comparison between the two, they both are looking to promote health and safety, both are looking to promote safe housing, both do the checks for safety and maintenance. One is primarily focused, the rental registration is focused on the tenant occupied inspections, and the pre-sale program, it could be either tenant occupied or it could be owner occupied. So there are instances where Nikki wants to sell her apartment building and it's 15 units. I can do a pre-sale inspection on that apartment building for the next owner, or I could do a rental inspection, and more likely it's both. So it's a bit of redundancy in both of the programs that we have on the books.
Can I interrupt here? If there were to be a third column, it would be the inspection that we talked about that most homeowners would get because their mortgage required it. So what would be the difference between that inspection and our pre-sale program?
That's exactly where I'm leading to. There's, no, that's fine. I was leading to, like, most companies for insurance purposes do require that you get some sort of housing inspection. What the city is doing is mimicking that same thing. So I have it as the last bullet. One of these is critical to the mission of the Bureau, which is, again, to promote safe housing. And the other one, although it's a good thing to do, we don't feel it's really critical to the mission of the Bureau and not where we should be primarily focused on a lot of our efforts, given the importance of the rental registration, the trends within the housing market, and quite frankly, the capacity of a lot of the team to conduct all of the rental inspections that we need to do, and then add this other kind of redundant inspection on top of it.
Is there any sense of how many we miss because of cash sales or people, cash sales? I don't think.
I don't have a good way of finding about the cash sales part, but I would say that either way, we're at about 50%.
Okay.
Yeah. So that just wanted to do a brief overview of each program, gave you some positives and negatives on each, and then wanted to kind of end in this recommendation for your consideration, which is to, thank you, Justin, to allow our team to shift efforts a little bit to focus on the more critical inspections needed to be completed and repeal the pre-sale inspection requirement and therefore the ordinance. So right now we'd be shifting gears. Instead of a transaction triggering an inspection, continue to be heavily focused on our rental registration program, our vacant registry program, nuisance abatement, resolving violations, resolving and being more responsive to complaints, but also being heavily focused on that code enforcement. So the follow through of all of the work, making sure that it comes to a resolve and just not hanging out there. And then we'd shift the responsibility of doing that housing inspection just triggered by a real estate transaction over to the private market where it typically tends to live. So I wanted to present that to the committee for consideration and then open it up for any questions, but I also know I wanted to do an executive session if you would not mind.
Does the private market inspection, I guess that's the term we use, does that always include lead inspection or not?
Most of the time, yes. And in fact, thank you for bringing that up. The code enforcement team completed lead training last week, and so now we can start to tool up to make that a part of our rental registration inspections as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess my question with your recommendation of what's the term we're talking about, taking this,
Repeal.
repeal, yes. We still need to find a way to get into these homes to do lead inspection. What would you recommend as a way that we can do that, if not from knowing about these transactions? Or can we still know about these transactions and get out there and do an inspection? Do we want to inspect homes? The answer is yes, of course, but how do we get there?
How do we get to inspecting homes that are not tenant occupied? I guess, is that your question?
Correct, yes.
So we can request, you've asked me this question before and I've thought about it. And we couldn't come up with a clear-cut way of doing inspections on homeowner-occupied properties unless we made it a requirement that we are to get a copy of any sort of report, and it must include a lead inspection report when these transactions happen. That doesn't have to live in the pre-sale ordinance, and I don't have the best answer for you right now, honestly.
I mean, I would think the county get these records, though. I mean, if we could twist their arms to let us know when transactions
Ye-
are made,
It's,
at least we'll know who they are. Whether we get to them or not is another thing.
Correct. So right now, we do have, as I mentioned, I'm sorry if I missed the question, but we do get reports of transactions on a monthly basis of what's happening in the city. So we do know where it's happening, but we just haven't done the subsequent, or I shouldn't say we haven't done the subsequent. We haven't been as on top of those as we needed to.
I know this is outside the scope. Or
Yeah.
should we just go around the city, just going into owner-occupied homes on a block-by-block, zone-by-zone basis?
I would not recommend that, but I think if we were to do a lot of education and marketing around the effects, and I know Dr. Motley works very hard at this, and I think if you could get people to onboard into how important this is, I think that's the best way to get the inspections done, especially around lead. And I'm saying that just the education that happened within the team over the last 2 weeks, now they're even a bit more mindful about how they conduct their inspections and telling other folks about the importance of testing for lead. So there's a function of compelling someone to say, I need to come in your house and to test, but there's also the other part of the education, the hand-holding, this is why it's important, and that's a campaign in itself.
All right. So
Can I-
lastly, are we, on the rental inspections, are we saying we're going to include that on rental inspections?
I'd love to.
Okay,
yes.
you'd love to, but that
Yes.
isn't what we're talking about now. We're just
That's
talking
not what
about
we're
repealing
talking, correct.
the-
And that's a function of changing, what you're describing is a function of changing what's on the inspection forms or administrative than having to do anything new or invent anything.
I'd like to step in for a minute in regards to, in regards to the lead-based inspections. When you sell a house, it's a requirement that you get the lead inspection. It's for your protection, get the lead inspection. And so I would think to include that, or at least allow us to have that information when someone is selling a house or purchasing a house. Every transaction that I've made or have had requires the owner to have that inspection right along with the radon inspection. And so I think if we put it in, what is it, the pre-sale?
I think we put it in, not the pre-sale ordinance. I think we put it as part of our, I forgot the name, I have it listed though. As part of our lead poisoning and control requirement. So whenever there's a transaction, the city gets a report as well on whether or not there was lead found in the property.
Yeah, because it's been my experience that I've seen all of those type of inspections done before they're able to even purchased the home. So we should be privy to that information.
Agreed. Thank you, Councilwoman.
In terms of the rental program, are we giving rental certificates out to everyone? Are we denying anyone? Are we based on them, whether they're owing fees to the city or, owing back taxes or owing, rubbish fees or whatever? Is there something in here where we can deny people a rental application until fees owed to the city is paid?
There's definitely language in the rental registration ordinance that speaks to revocation of a license based on some of those things. So it could be that the owner, continues to have the violations and them not be cured. And it's gone on for longer than the compliance date that we've issued. The city does have the right to revoke their rental license and tag that as an illegal unit. If there's failure to pay annual registration fees, the city can revoke a license. If there is any outstanding taxes or rubbish fees, the city can revoke license, and they can also not issue permits. So there are lots of, unless it's an emergency situation. So, if there's a sewer pipe that burst and you need a permit for that, we're not going to say you can't have your permit, right? But if it's something that's non-life threatening, the city does have the right to not issue permits, revoke permits, and revoke rental licenses and tag places as an illegal rental.
We have the right and we can. Are we doing it?
There is one instance now where that is the case. Someone owes rental registration fees, and we've made the communication that should these not be paid, your license will be revoked and your properties will be tagged. Under my tenure, I have not seen that case pop up, but no.
We have not. I want us to start and be aggressive with it.
Okay.
I think that's something that we need to do. I think for a long time, people continue to play with Chester. I think we gotta stand strong. We gotta let people know you can't just come in here and do any kind of business, and you can't owe the city all of these taxes and fees, and then you continue to rent your property and make money off of rental fees or whatever from tenants and still not pay the city. And so I would like to see some kind of language or some kind of something where we're going after these people and we're revoking people's license or not giving them a rental permit until these fees are paid up, and tagging these homes and doing whatever we need to do to make sure that the city is getting what we're owed.
Agreed. Heard, Councilman. That is one of my points in trying to refocus and shift a little bit to what are the critical things that the team should be doing more of, and stay firmly in that and following through on from A to Z. That's one of the items we've been working to do a lot in the Bureau.
And this ordinance, I would like to see a copy of it. I don't know if I've seen the rental.
The rental one?
Yes.
Okay, sure, I can get that to you.
And another thing, on the presentation, you talked about, you guys get a lot of complaints. I'm assuming from tenants about no heat, no plumbing, different things like that. When a tenant comes to the city and say, hey, I have a slum landlord, and these are all of the issues, and this is what they're not doing, what are we doing as a city to help these tenants or to hold landlords accountable?
So the first step of when we get a complaint is to, depending on the type of complaint, is to go out and investigate and confirm. So in the instances where it's things like no heat, that's a 24-hour compliance. You have to provide temporary and fix the heat within 24 hours. That's been my practice. And should the place be deemed as uninhabitable, then we're requiring that the landlord house the tenant, address any of the issues, and then rehouse them at the location if possible. So we do have remedies if there are any significant, anything life safety is a 24-hour compliance time, but depending on the other things, we might give compliance dates for 72 hours to a week, depending on the severity of it. So we do follow through on that piece of it.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
They just contact the L&I department and then, oh, excuse me, then they go forth with it?
Correct. So I believe there are complaint forms at the front desk, but we also have an email address where you can send in complaints. And of course, you can contact our staff directly via phone number if anyone would like to submit a complaint.
And if the landlord doesn't comply or doesn't do what is needed, what do we do? What's the repercussions?
Depending on the situation, but typically it's violation letter goes out. Depending on whether they comply or not, it goes all the way into a citation with the magistrate and a court hearing. And it could also be that the landlord is issued, I'm losing my place a little bit. There's so many different kind of remedies around, let's say, property issues. So in the long game of it all, we do go from a violation letter when there's no compliance into a citation. In the first piece of it all, it's really trying to get the landlord to address something if it's anything life safety. But the primary thing has been to either threaten revocation of the license, but really most, let's see, especially in the complexes, most of them tend to comply, not within the time frame, but they comply.
And I'm all asking these questions, and this is not necessarily on the agenda, but we talked about in your presentation about the complaints that we get, and a lot of them are coming from, residents or tenants of these different housing. And I know one of the reports that we got was from the HUD in reference to the Benjamin Banneker's, and they scored an 8 out of 100. And so if they scored an 8 out of 100, we had to know, as a city, I know they've made a number of complaints. They was complaining even back 5 years ago when I was community liaison. And so I know that they are complaining, and I know that the city, we knew about this information, or we knew how poor the living conditions are down at the Benjamin Banneker's. So what have we done, or what are we doing for not only that particular location, but other particular developments that is not up to par, and the living conditions are terrible for our residents? And you may not be able to answer that now. You may not, I understand that it's a complex question, but it's also something that we really have to look at, and we really have to start holding landlords and housing developments accountable.
I fully agree and appreciate what you're saying. That's a part of my language, and like, let's shift to the more critical inspections is exactly around that. So the first thing that we had to do is really making sure that everyone understood how to conduct an inspection. What are we looking at? And are we standardizing what that looks like across the team? Are we making sure that things are documented? Are we getting to the point of actually doing said inspections? Are we following through with we said comply within 72 hours? Did we go back and check 72 hours later that they complied? It's things like that that really get us to a point to be more responsive to the issues that you're bringing up. So I fully agree with you, and it's been a process over my tenure in the last 6 months, but really what we've tried to do is not just be passive in making sure things are scheduled, but making sure that we're having regular check-ins as a team to say, did we follow up? What was the result? What's the next step? give me some categories here. And today, it continues. Our team was in training on the property maintenance code and how to conduct inspections and standardizing what looks bad and what looks okay. Like it's been a process. We've been working on our follow through and working on being more responsive as a bureau. And I know I personally gone out with the team to do inspections, to look at nuisance abatement, to say, this is what we look like, this isn't okay. And we're getting to it. We're getting to a point of, I feel proud about where we started and where we are now, but there's still a lot more that we need to get done.
I have a question, and I'm agreeing that people shouldn't just be, or these different privately owned entities, where most of our residents reside, like the Bannekers, Crosby Square Apartments, they're all HUD, right? And so HUD has regulations that they have to follow, and we should kind of piggyback off of what their guidelines are, if that makes sense. And before they get a rental license and somebody comes in and does an inspection, those things do need to be listed and followed through on, to your point, because that would eliminate some of the issues that some of our residents have. So do we, you said you were working towards that, and I don't think that any license should be given if there's even something that's questionable. And with a lot of these privately owned and HUD-owned properties, it's a mess. There's no follow-through, and people are living in poor conditions. So if something could be put in place before the licenses are issued, that would be a plus.
Agreed, heard Councilwoman. And one of the items we've been evaluating is, to your point, we do everything we're supposed to do. We do the inspection, but there's a compliance date of 6 months. That's unacceptable. So
Yes.
we've been correcting some of those things too, like where are the cracks that things are falling through? It's been a discovery session on my end, but
I'm sure.
we're finding we're finding them, and I'm doing my best to get them corrected so things like that don't continue to happen.
I think you're doing a wonderful job.
I appreciate that. Thank you
It's been
so
a lot
much.
of progress since you've been on board. I appreciate your due diligence,
Thank
you
you
and the
very
whole staff.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And do we have information or follow-up on Crosby Square Apartments? That big issue that they were having there? I know this may be a little off topic, but it just popped in.
I'm sorry, one more.
Crosby Square
Crosby
Apartments.
Square.
Maybe Miss Judy knows something about it. Did they ever, I know they were supposed to go and inspect the units because there was a lot of rodents, there was trash, it was, some of the apartments were in deplorable conditions. And so I was waiting last year to hear something about the follow-up for that. But I know you talked about the Bannekers, Crosby Square Apartments. That was major. They were supposed to do, we were supposed to do an inspection.
Last year, they were supposed to do an
Yeah, like, what, maybe November, December?
Okay, that's not ringing, but I will have an answer for you right after this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and in terms of the repealing ordinance, are we going to talk about that now, or?
I would like to go in executive session prior.
Okay. That works. Any more questions? Any questions or comments from the public? All right, can I get an adjournment?
No.
Motions?
Second, no, huh?
Oh, Paul, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you, Nikki.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
What I was hoping to do today is just give you an introduction to a zoning amendment that we're proposing for smoke shops and tobacco shops. And what I did today, I'm going to give you is a memo that I wrote to the Planning Commission a while ago on the reason why we want to do the smoke shop amendment. And then I'm actually going to give you a draft of the amendment. And then what I'll do today, and I'll be really brief, is just go over what's in that memo to give you a heads up on it.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
before you continue?
Yes.
Did Joan know about this part that you get ready to do?
We added it on after the adjustment, so.
Okay, I'm just worried about what was advertised and people might not know. Okay, so what's going, because it's not on here, and I want to make sure I put it on here for her. What's going on?
It's a proposal for a zoning amendment. Let me look at this.
Thank you.
Since you've sent this to the planning commission, have they met on it?
They have it.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do, just, because I don't want to rush this, so to speak, but it is an important amendment to get in front of, because right now, all we have in the zoning ordinance is retail stores. And a use like this, a smoke shop, which if you're all familiar with what they are, there's 5 of them in Brookhaven if you've driven down Edgemont Ave. They're all condensed in one location roughly. There's something you need to get on top of because they do have impacts, as you well know, on school-aged children, on the influence of using drug paraphernalia.
Well, hold on.
Oh,
Does Chester have smoke shops now?
it's a good question. My understanding is there's what I would call mixed retail uses where it may be a retail store and they sell components that are related to drug paraphernalia or smoke shop related things. I do not think there's a distinct smoke shop. I could be wrong on that, and I'm welcome for someone to correct me on that, but I don't think there's a standalone smoke shop or tobacco store in the city of Chester.
So are we addressing the smoke shop issue or the smoke shop paraphernalia in existing retail stores, or both?
Both.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to do. And we put a square footage limit on the ones that's a mixed retail use, and we put limits on that. And the limits are by distance to another similar institution, distance from a park, distance from a school, and maybe there's something else in there in the amendment.
And it's all proposed? You're bringing it to us to move it forward?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And what I would like to do is, because I'm just putting this in front of you right now, is this still needs to be vetted with the county. What I plan on doing is sending a draft to the county. It's simply a draft. We get their feedback on this, which is important because you really can't approve this without the county's feedback. And then what I can do is come back in another month and let you know what the county said, which what I would do in front of the planning commission as well. And then we can get the ball rolling on like the official review process, if that makes sense to you. Because I just don't want to throw this in front of you and say, hey, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be voting on this. I'd
No,
rather
I know
go through
there's a
the
guy
process.
sitting here today who, before he came to the city of Chester, he stomped on smoke shops and things of that nature. Is that the same process that you followed in Glen Olden?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yes.
And piggyback on that, the county actually gave us a template for this zoning amendment. So we're not pulling this out of the air. We're using an example that Sharon Hill did, Darby Borough, and I think Aston just approved something recently. So it's something Delaware County's highly familiar with and is a proponent of us doing this.
And I think it's an awesome thing to do because, I mean, if you're talking about the paraphernalia that's at the corner stores,
Yeah.
I went to one the other day and the whole counter was filled with the hookahs and different pipes and things like that.
Yeah.
It's right directly down the street from a school, but then now fentanyl has been found in the vapes.
Yeah.
And so any of our young children can get a hold of that, and that could be detrimental to them and the community. So I applaud your efforts in wanting to do something about it.
You actually brought up something that's just something I want to point out too. It's like an anecdote, but this does not cover cigar bars, and it does not cover hookah bars. Now, that's something we can look at later down the line, but this is really trying to get to the paraphernalia and the small convenience stores that sell this or the standalone buildings. And just so you know, there has been interest, and Kim has told me this, I think it happened before I got here in July of last year, that someone was interested in understanding if there was a place for a smoke shop. And a couple things too, and again, I don't want to get into this too much because I'm sure you have questions, and I hope you read this and then bring me questions at a future meeting or any time, is that we cannot exclude these uses throughout the city. Just like an adult use, you can't do that. There's fair similar to the Fair Housing Act, you have to apply, you have to allow this type of use somewhere in your city. So in this instance, we're actually proposing this to be in the MIC zoning district, which is the medium industrial commercial district, which, if you know, is from basically Commodore Bridge to, let's just say, the state prison on Front Street South. So it's not on 291, it's the district that's close to the water. Actually, it is in the waterfront overlay district, but it's that district. But then it's also in the CBD that we're proposing in here. But there's limitations on that because right now we have a distance requirement that may need to be juggled because what we have in here is 1,000 feet separation. That would exclude everything in the CBD. I'm a little hesitant to just limit to the MIC because if we got a argument from an applicant that we're not allowing it in the city, it's on the burden on the city is that saying that we do allow it. I think there's some debate if we just leave it to the MIC or we allow it in the CBD with some tight restrictions on it.
What do you mean by CBD?
Oh, Central Business District, sorry, which, as you know, is from Madison Street to Chester Creek to 291 up to 9th Street. So it's a really condensed district. But again, we have its location to churches, parks, schools. I'm probably missing one. And once you draw a window around those, it's very hard to find a place in the CBD to allow that type of use. It would probably be right at the corner that we look out in this window here and not many other spots. Oh, and daycares was the other one. I'm sorry.
And so will this ordinance go after the stores that are currently selling this stuff? And also, is there anything in place where you can go to the stores and shut them down, or, you know, I don't know if they go and raid the stores or whatnot that are currently selling these items that should not be sold? If they have a retail license, are they allowed to sell these items?
It's a good question. I need to look into that and like if there's some license or something that they need to sell this. I don't think they do. But this act, going back to your first question, is if a mixed retail use was selling beyond the amount that we're, like the square footage amount that we're requiring them, we could tell them that they've tripped that and they have to meet our standards.
Okay.
But we wouldn't be able to limit them if they've already been established. That's another reason to execute this amendment as soon as possible.
I know the state used to have a program where they had different members of, I just drew a blank, I'm sorry. People would come out and they would monitor these stores to see if the stores were selling the items to underage children.
Right.
And then they would shut them down,
Yeah.
you know, so
Yeah.
I can't recall the program. I'll look into it, and if I can get some information,
Yeah, if you find something, I'll look that up too. But
Yeah.
yeah, that will be the question is like, how do we enforce this? This is like true of any amendment we have in our zoning ordinance. It's like, how are we going to enforce this, or building license inspection as well? So, but it does, what this does really is prevent the future people coming in, getting a zoning permit for a retail use, and we're like, oh, it's not what we want, but we have no right to stop them. This gives us the power to stop that type of use or prevent maximizing the use of it.
I think it's important to do it because, I mean, again, maybe like 2 weeks ago, there are drug addicts that are outside these businesses.
Yeah.
And if you're wanting an addict to be cured from this type of thing, but you still have all of this paraphernalia, that makes it kind of hard. And then they stand outside of these businesses, and only God knows what happens, you know. But I seen a young man go into the store one day. He was 5 minutes, and the next couple of minutes he was out on the ground. I had to call 911. You know, so it's easy for them to access this. And this gentleman was like maybe 17, 18 years old, right? So I think it'd be positive to put these things in place.
Yeah, and that's a big issue is the loitering from these. They shouldn't be doing that, and that just
Right.
causes other issues. Exactly. Yeah.
What did the planning commission say?
They were a proponent of it. We went into a little bit about the CBD and the MIC. MIC is probably the natural fit because all the other districts, they sprinkle out throughout the whole city, and then you're sprinkling these possibly out in the city. The MIC it's a tough location. It's south of 291, Would a retail space go in there? Maybe not, but it seems like an appropriate one. And then there's debate, I think, in-house about the CBD and the distance requirements for that district. But otherwise, they're a proponent of getting this through
Thanks.
and supportive. So I think what I'll do is I'll come back in front of you before we get this in front of council, say what the final one is, let you look at it, and get it out to you ahead of time, and we'll move it right through the council process. That makes sense? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions from the committee? Any questions from the public? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.
Good job.
I don't,
Are we doing executive now, or, okay.
yes. I know he. Right. Because it was his wife that Teresa that showed me, so.